Continuing Prophecies and Panentheism, specifically Symbiotic Panentheism. Wheel of Dharma, 500 BC. Moving on. Buddhism initiated the spin of the Wheel of Enlightenment. Buddhism prophesied the wheel would spin 2,500 years with the aid of an infusion of new energy at 500-year intervals or cycles. The prophecy, however, predicted the infusion of new energy would not be enough to keep the wheel from slowing down and eventually stopping by or around the year 2000 AD. You may recall the Prince song, 1999. It speaks of the year 2000. Party's over, it's out of time. I'm gonna party like it's 1999, said the lyricist. Continuing. Buddhists believe enlightenment is generated by a form of momentum. They relate it to a spinning wheel. The wheel must be assisted in its spin, or eventually it will stop spinning. Their prophecy, established in 500 BC, says Buddhism began to spin the wheel, at which point the 500-year cycles began. Christ, in 0 to 4 AD, Islam in 500 AD. Beyond that, it becomes debatable what 500-year factors contributed energy to the spin. It could be argued the development of religious philosophy, ontology, in and around 1000 AD was the next factor, followed by the development of what we call modern science in 1500 AD. What one wishes to conjecture as to what were the causes of the 500-year energy bursts is not of importance. What is of interest is the idea that, like the Great Pyramid timeline, the Hopi Indians' prophecy rock, the Mayan calendar, and the apparent prophecy of 2012 AD, based on the Mayan calendar cycles, as well as so many other ancient prophecies developed worldwide since. Buddhists also predict a very significant juncture in time will occur at the end of this millennium. That would be approximation of 2000 AD. Saying that this particular material was written at the end of the 20th century. We are now in the 21st century, 2022 AD specifically. Buddhists believe the wheel will stop spinning at the end of the 2,500-year cycle. They do not forecast any gloom and destruction, as is common in many other worldwide prophecies. They leave a message of hope. They imply you and I, can spin the wheel ourselves if we wish to do so. We can give the wheel a fresh spin that will last another 2,500 years. But just looking at the wheel is not enough. We can only spin the wheel of Dharma if we reach out, take hold of it, and intentionally spin it. What can we do to create a spin capable of enduring 2,500 years? Whatever it is, it will have to be something very basic to endure the onslaught of time. The initial spin of the wheel oriented around a change in perception, a huge perceptual shift. The eliminating of suffering, as is common in Buddhist doctrine. Each additional energy infusion also oriented around a change in perception or consciousness. Perhaps the initiation of the next spin must do the same. Revelation, or revelations, as this says. A reference to the Apocalypse of St. John, the very last book of the canon of the Holy Bible. 0 AD, the thunder of horses' hooves. This, of course, a reference to the 4 horsemen of the Apocalypse. I would also mention that there's a 5th horseman, which is the white horse rider of Revelation 19. The first 4 being Revelation 6. We hear it from the pulpits, the time is at hand. A rider on each of the 4 horses, one white, one red, one black, one pale. The 4 riders and their horses, accompanied by 4 hell riders. The eight will come thundering down the plain of time, one after the other. And as we watch, we will stand in awe and fear, doing nothing. Revelation, or revelations, as this says, like all the other prophecies, does not predict what will be. Revelation's prophecies, what will be if what? If we do not change or choose to evolve spiritually by shifting our perceptions. If we continue on the path we are currently on, if we continue to ignore the big picture, the prophecies do not come right out and tell us what we must do to change. If they had, they would have shorted out the process of growth or spiritual evolution that had to take place for our species. There was so much for us to learn in order to understand. A child of 9 or 10 may be able to survive without assistance, but what about 1, 2, or 3 years old? Growth must take place. A time for learning must be allowed. A species is no different. Our species is no different. The species may be composed of individuals, but the individuals can only absorb so much. How could caveman ever understand the concept of the need to eliminate suffering? Enter Buddhism. How could the first Roman emperor ever understand the Christian concept of unconditional love? Or the Muslim concept of justice for all? Ontology, the concept of understanding God or a causative force without religion getting in the way, or the evolutionary development of humans being understood by the first few popes? Hardly. Time was needed for growth. Revelations had nothing new to offer us. This is not belittling the need for revelation. We had been told before, but the message had to be made clear, told over and over by many cultures, not just by one. Before we could not understand, we were still learning. We learned through great teachers. Some would say by the intervention of the causative force herself. This is not the point of debate being addressed in this work. The point being addressed is change. What do we have to change, to adapt, in order to significantly reduce the traumas? This trilogy does more than say we have to change. It suggests, it means to do so. In reference to the trilogy mentioned, this library contains all of the philosophical works completed between 1996 and the mid-2005. All of these works can be viewed online at www.panentheism.com and are downloadable and freely accessible to the public. The trilogy mentioned is You and I Together, Have a Purpose in Reality, published 1996, discussion on the nature of God, the soul, and the universe, and theoretical metaphysics. This first book in the trilogy explores why a creative force could and would create something from nothing. Our humankind's purpose and destiny is within this universe. Isolated concepts such as mathematics, science, philosophy, and religion are merged to shape a universal philosophy, a philosophy that does not undermine established religions, alternative philosophies, scientific theories and concepts, traditions, and cultures, plural. It is a philosophy that seeks to reinforce and build on established beliefs, not deconstruct, but rather reconstruct or build upon that foundation, negating nothing, one which will provide a foundation for growth and the exploration of who we are, why we exist, and where we are potentially going. The second book in the trilogy mentioned in this writing is In the Image of God, published 1997. The nature of God, the soul, and free will, and metaphysical engineering. And the third book, which I've primarily discussed, is entitled Stepping Up to the Creator. Author of this work is Daniel J. Shepard. Stepping Up to the Creator discusses the nature of God, the soul, and knowledge of practical metaphysics. Continuing in the prophecies. Papal prophecies. 1100 AD. 2 to go. In 1139 AD, Saint Malachy left Ireland and began a pilgrimage to Rome. On his way, he fell into a trance and began reciting in Latin. His work, or his servant, recorded his phrases, all 111 of them. time proved to be the element needed to tie these phases to the succession of popes, each phrase describing the next succeeding pope. 109 of the 111 phrases have been descriptive of the last 109 popes. There are two prophetic phrases left, and then a prediction: destruction and judgment. What does it mean? What kind of destruction and judgment will follow the next two popes? And is this destruction and judgment a certainty? Again, as so often put forward within this trilogy, there are two possibilities. Either the destruction and judgment is a certainty, or it is not. If it is a certainty, then we have no free will. If the future is predetermined in every way, then there is nothing to worry about, for whatever will be, will be. However, if we have free will, and a greater consensus in philosophical discussions says that we do, and I believe that we do, then we have the ability to act. Free will gives us the ability to change things. If we cannot change the future, or the potential futures, we do not have free will. And we are back to determinism and predestination. Without free will, it would make no difference what we did. The future would remain the same. Perhaps wishful thinking for the hard determinists. Without free will, should eternity exist, we could not be held responsible for neglecting all the warning signs of prophecies. If, however, the future is not predetermined, if we have free will, then we have responsibility for the future or potential futures that could unfold. Of course, that depends on what actions we decide to take. If free will exists, we will be held responsible for not having listened to the prophecies, the revelations, the warnings of an apocalypse to come. There is no denying the vast number of prophecies exist. There is no denying the notoriety that they all have worldwide within many of the spiritual traditions. There is no denying the fundamental message they all give us: change, or else trauma of unbelievable proportions will occur. And there is no denying that they all tell us that we can change and that the future is not an absolute. The word repentance, often used in Christianity, means to turn around or to change. The word sin means missing the mark. St. Malachi's message is no different just because it resides in the papal library of the Vatican. Where it resides is important, for it places responsibility for change upon the Catholic leadership, where it belongs. Nostradamus. 1500 AD. Gloom and destruction and hope. The prophecies of Nostradamus are so well known and respected that they were used by both Allies and the Axis powers in their attempt to apply psychological warfare against each other during World War II. Nostradamus is not just another voice in the sea of human utterances, warning of the end of times to come. Nostradamus lived from 1503 to 1566, and his prophetic predictions have done nothing but gain respect and status over the last 400 or so years. Nostradamus did not predict only destruction. Nostradamus gave us hope. His prophecies not only strongly implied change of phenomenal proportions would occur at the turn of the millennium, but they implied it could occur in one of two manners. Nostradamus said the change would occur either through our historical process of just letting change occur randomly, or we could do the changing ourselves intentionally. The results would be entirely different in each case. If we just let change happen, random, chance, of its own accord, it could be or would be violent, global, and on a scale the likes of which we had never seen. If on the other hand, we took change and guided change intentionally, it would be much less traumatic and humane. Whatever the case, Nostradamus has prophesied that cataclysmic change will occur by the end of this millennium. The approximate time that this work was published and put in accessible format to the public. The only choice we have is how change will occur. We have free will to choose. This sounds a lot like determinism, but in actuality it is not. Change is a natural part of our universe. How we deal with that change is not. The Earth's orbit of the Sun may be predetermined, but how we deal with the seasons created by revolving around the Sun is not. Nostradamus is a seer, as was Saint Malachi. The Mayan calendar, the Great Pyramid timeline, and the Hopi Prophecy Rock are physical objects. The Wheel of Dharma and Revelation, the Apocalypse of St. John, are religious warnings, perhaps not to be taken so lightly. All of these prophecies are scattered throughout history. They cannot all be found originating during one particular point in time. They all have been trying to tell us something. Change, 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 or else this. Edgar Cayce, 1900 AD, Natural Cataclysms. Edgar Cayce was a simple man with simple wants and needs. A nickname given him was the Sleeping Prophet. Yet he was a seer with a special gift. Some would say such gifts were delusions and fantasies. Perhaps, but it's interesting that they are universal, not only globally, but in terms of time. Cayce was not chosen as one of the prophets because he is the best known, but rather because he is one of the better known in our more recent history. He was said to have been highly clairvoyant. We have been told, we have been shown, some would say that prophecies are pure primitive fantasies we create out of fear of the future. But are they? Hasn't history shown us change is not a unique event? Hasn't change been with us throughout our entire existence as a species? What is so primitive about believing change will occur again in the future? About observing cycles and repetitions and patterns in history? Mexico provides us with fairly solid evidence that global eradication of an entire class of animals can occur in a few short months. The dinosaurs grip our interest not just because they are big, but because they don't exist anymore. The dinosaurs are gone. We have fossils and bones to prove it. They may have existed all over the world and in all the seas, but proof they are gone. The lessons we can learn from this is that it could happen again. Prophecy of future cataclysms is not gloom and doom. It is a voice of hope. It is a voice saying that we do not need to be like the dinosaurs. We are intelligent enough to survive, and we are intelligent enough to reduce the after effects of global cataclysms if we think ahead and plan. Planning ahead involves preparing for the possibilities of global cataclysms. These are not foolhardy actions. These are realistic, practical actions based upon what has happened in the past and based upon the understanding that we live in a universe filled with change, often dramatic changes. But how does one prepare? Society must prepare, and that includes sciences, religions, and philosophies. Each must do their jobs. Each must prepare society for the worst as best they can. Hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. We already see the signs around us. One would have to be blind, or willfully blind, not to see. And what is society? Society is the individual, the soul, which is where the significance of our species lies. Others, unless we change. They span time, they span cultures, they span the globe. Some even come from we know not where. They lie as grains of sand upon the beach, too numerous to count and too intriguing to ignore. The 9 prophecies listed were only 9 of thousands. The internet is a wonderful source for exploring the universal characteristics of these messages of hope. Yes, hope, because they all imply the message they have to offer us is not a message of an end of times, but the beginning of a new time. Christ said, I am the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. The end is just another beginning. Behold, I make all things new. They all say the transition from our present emphasis upon the material will change to the social, to concern over the individual, to concern over the rights of the individual to travel, because the individual soul is more than an individual. They all imply we will break through to a new level of consciousness. What could that new level of consciousness be? That new level of consciousness is supposedly a new form of understanding what it is we are and why we exist, a new sense of connection and or interconnection, interdependence. Whatever the case, the implication is that we will continue to grow as individuals and as a summation of individuals as a species. None of the prophecies imply the end of the world has come, but rather the end of an age or eon of time. Within the cycles, they say the transition will be turbulent, but we will get through it. They also say we have the ability, the free will, to reduce the turbulence if we choose to do so. A trained pilot of an airliner has the ability to reduce the turbulence. Why? Because of their highly trained skill. This trilogy was not written as a doom or gloom, nor to attempt to give validity to prophecy, although it is valid in many ways. Rather, it was written based upon the concept that criticism is worthless as pure criticism, and thus the only way criticism can be of value is if it is constructive rather than destructive. Constructive criticism is an action that suggests a flaw and then suggests a reasonable solution. This work may appear to be centered around the concept of suggesting that the model of symbiotic panentheism should be adopted by society. This appearance, however, is what comes from examining the surface instead of exploring the message. It is not about the messenger, but the message. And that is why this material is freely accessible, free to share by everyone. The message is that it is time to build a model of what we think we are by using what we believe, faith, religions, spiritualities, what we see, the sciences, what we reason, philosophies. It's time to build a unified view, a universal philosophy, because it could help us make our next great leap up as a species. It could help us prepare us for our next step forward, to step into the heavens themselves. The pyramids, the Hopi, the Mayan calendar, Revelations, the Holy Bible, other sacred texts, the Wheel of Dharma, papal prophecies, Edgar Cayce, Nostradamus, and a plethora have told us the same thing. Change will occur, and with change will come major trauma unless we change. Go with the flow and or roll with the punches. These prophecies have not left us a message of despair. They have left us a message of hope. They have told us we can reduce the trauma if we wish to do so, and if we are willing to make the efforts. The question is, are we willing to do so? The flesh is weak, but the spirit is willing. Conclusion. This work has taken what we believe, religion, what we see, science, what we reason, philosophy, and what we've been told, prophecies, and used them to build a model of a universal philosophy, namely Symbiotic Panentheism, variation of Panentheism as a worldview, a theological perspective, as well as a philosophy, capable of uniting religion, philosophy, and science. It represents an example of the type of change we are capable of generating. SP, or Symbiotic Panentheism, may be a great leap enough to be the central theme for the next 500-year cycle. But that is not the point. The point is we need to begin to look for a means by which we are able to make the next great leap of enlightenment without having it forced upon us. The process involves building a model we can accept as a species of individuals. The model is just that, a model, and cannot be the answer, and it certainly isn't final, but needs to be a working model that undergoes constant change, as does everything else, to fit our changing and evolving perceptions and understandings as they develop. Symbiotic panentheism is a unifying, peace-generating, tolerance-oriented, justice-provoking, significance-inducing, loving rationality. It creates a logically oriented, observation-supported foundation incapable of destroying anything we hold dear, and capable of reinforcing our significance in the universe. Significance is something we need to understand before we encounter the mysterious events that will present themselves as we emerge into space itself. If the concept of SP leads people to become Christian, it will have failed in its purpose. If Symbiotic Panentheism leads the Christian to become Hindu, it has failed. If it leads the atheist to become a theist, or Jew to become Muslim, or Muslim to become Buddhist, it has failed. Conversion is the sign of failure. Conversion should not be the focus. A Christian may say, I am a Christian proudly, but yet that belief is not truly who they are at a fundamental level. They are a soul, an individual. Conversion is the sign of failure of the model, for conversion proves the model is not a universal model, but a particular, exclusivist model. Or should I say, a religious superiority model. An us versus them model. A model of substance dualism. A unified view, I would say, would embrace the concept of non-dualism, philosophically speaking. A unified view, but rather conversion shows the model is slanted toward one side or the other. Conversion shows the model is a statement of faith rather than a statement of the uniqueness of all three: faith, observation, and reason. Science, religions, spiritualities, and philosophies. a new metaphysical ontological perspective. The only way the model could be considered as successful is with its establishment of a desire to change who we are in order to prevent major catastrophe predicted by these prophecies. The model of symbiotic panentheism cannot prevent a meteor from striking the earth, but the model could change our perception of what life is and thereby change this most traumatic sequence of events. Trauma may be initiated by a meteor strike, terrorist detonation of a hydrogen bomb over any city, or anthrax being introduced into the water supply of Tel Aviv, God forbid, but these episodes themselves are not where the major trauma will lie. The major trauma will lie in how we will react to these events, both individually and as a species. As a species, global war, global economic collapse, and global retaliation will generate the most trauma. As individuals, small bands of humans attempting to profit from the cataclysm by establishing their own turf or exclusivity, their own dominance of individuals, their own definition of inclusion into their group or clique, could create trauma worldwide on a level the likes of which we have never before seen. Change in perception could circumvent both the species and individual regression into our past actions of domination, egocentrism, ethnocentrism, tribal warrior consciousness, power struggles, self-righteousness, abuse, and self-serving actions. Only a change in perception, uniting the logic of reason, the strength of faiths, the absolute of observation, can form a model of perception capable of overriding our historical behavior of building great civilizations only to have them collapsed and or destroyed in order to make room for new ideas. Only by changing ourselves voluntarily, within, intentionally, can we possibly prevent the traumatic prophecies envisioned that have stood before our species since time began. Change will occur whether we like it or not. In fact, as we speak, change is happening now. It is the way of the universe. It is the way of reality. It may well be the way of the larger reality, the causative force herself, or what religions call God. This time, however, we can control the change by changing ourselves. This change, or this cannot take place on a basis of triviality, nor on a basis of governmental decree. It has to take place on a basis of global individual consensus. The only manner to obtain such an independent consensus is through a construction of a unified view, uniting religions, spiritualities, sciences, and philosophies by fusing faith, observation, logic, and reason. The construction of such a model would not convert a Hindu to Christian, nor a Muslim to Jew. Rather, it would change them all by broadening the idea of inclusiveness. The Hindu would now become a Hindu Christian, and the Christian a Christian Hindu. The Muslim would become a Muslim Jew, and the Jew a Jewish Muslim. One could even become a Hindu, Jewish, Buddhist, Christian, Muslim. And that is basically the pluralist model of interreligious, interfaith dialogue and theologies. All would worship in each other's house of worship. All would respect the uniqueness of the other. All would take pride in knowing the others existed as moments or monuments of our historical struggles to establish the uniqueness of the individual, the soul. The Jew would feel at ease and at peace celebrating as a Jew within the Church of Christianity, and the Christians would take the Jew under their wing. Anti-Semitism would be a thing of the past. The Christian would feel at ease worshiping within the mosque of the Muslim as the Muslim took the Christian under their wing, and so it would go. You believe it cannot happen, and you are right. It cannot happen presently because we do not have a unified view in place, and so things remain as they are. And at this juncture, things seem to be escalating and getting more violent and worse. Things will continue as they are until we change. With a major cataclysmic tragedy, we will once again, as individuals, as souls, and as a species, amplify the trauma of the tragedy through repeating the tragedies of our past. This cycle must and can be broken. But collectively, we must take the effort to do so. As much as we may not want it to occur, change will take place, whether we like it or not. This time, something will be different. This time, we will undergo the trauma of change, knowing that we had a choice. The choice is before us, as contemplated within this work. We will undergo the trauma knowing we understood the process but chose to do nothing about it. We choose to deconstruct rather than construct. The choice is before us. What will we do? In the past, history looked back upon such collapses of civilizations and understood why we did not prevent the tragedies. Our predecessors did not and could not understand how to circumvent the historical cycle of collapse and tragedy. This time, however, history will look back upon our actions differently. This time, history will look back and sadly shake its head. For history will see that we did have the understanding available to us to change in a less traumatic manner, but consciously chose not to do so. Out of sheer arrogance and stubborn pride, or just laziness perhaps? It's hard to speculate. Nevertheless, we have the choice, and it's our choice to make. About the author, Daniel J. Shepard, author of You and I Together and In the Image of God and Stepping Up to the Creator, as well as the rest of the material presented on the website, earned a BS degree from the University of Michigan and a master's degree in physical science of Eastern Michigan University. This material can be accessed at www.panentheism.com. In short, the disclaimer and copyright as presented on the website reads, "The work contained on this website may be reproduced or utilized in any form by any means for educational or commercial purpose. The copyright was obtained only to protect the source and the integrity of the work, to guarantee your access and permission to reproduce this material. These concepts are not my own," says Shepard. "They are the merging and logical conclusion to the blending of ideas created within a society supported and maintained by a vast number of people, including you and those who came before you. Respect it. Share it. It's more important than you may realize at this point."